Hey guys, had a brief moment in between a couple of meetings and thought that I would go ahead and do the video that I had talked about in regards to utility rates for the city of Pauls Valley. Had mentioned in a previous podcast on YouTube a little while ago that we are having a special meeting tomorrow, September 30th at 6 p.m. at City Hall in order to discuss utility rates in the city of Pauls Valley for both water, wastewater, and sanitation. I know that this has been a conversation that really is stemmed back all the way to the summer. Everyone is sort of aware if you've gone to city council meetings or pay attention to any of the things reported in the paper or BME or anyone else. With regard to some of the issues we have with water, wastewater, DEQ, consent orders, the whole nine. I think it's good to sort of start with the why, like what is happening and why are we looking at utility rate increases? And it basically comes down to the idea that we currently are under consent orders for both the water plant and for the wastewater facility in regards to our production of water as well as the cleaning of wastewater. And so there is a sort of a per day fine that accumulates conceptually from DEQ. It's sort of held in reserve, if you will. Over time, if you don't take care of the actions within a certain relevant timeline, those fines can increase. And if you don't address all said issues in an appropriate time manner based on DEQ guidelines, that large sums, that whole sum can be parlayed to you. Now, those fines on a per day basis can go upwards of, I think the max is $25,000 per day for associated violations if you're not sort of doing the things that you're supposed to be doing relevant to DEQ. I think we're at like $180 a day now, something in that range. So, you can look at this and say, well, it's cheaper just to pay the fines. However, that is not necessarily what we're wanting to do with the city. Because at some point you get to a place that's untenable, you have to do the repairs anyway, and you have a large fine associated. And we want to do things for the right reason, not because DEQ or fines are telling us to do so. So this is why we're looking at the rate studies that we've had in relation to water plant, wastewater, and sanitation. And so if you kind of look at, there have been some proposed ideas for how to do both projects for the water plant and the wastewater facility at the same time that would increase people's utility bill by about 41 cents per month in that range total. And there were different proposals that would help us get more things done over a quicker fashion. There's been a lot of discussion, I know, both on social media and the paper, amongst people in town, to council folks, to city manager, all the issues with things on fixed income, folks in that way, affordability, cost, everything. And so the council has certainly been weighing that out. There's discussions that I've had with the public and with other council members in regards to this. And so it's not something that's done very easily, obviously. And so as we sort of think about this consideration, there has been a discussion of just doing what would be the most prominent project first, which is the water plant. I can't say definitively that's what's going to occur. It looks like that be made more favored, and then the wastewater sort of being addressed a little bit further down the road. That would diminish some of the associated costs and utility rates, give people time to sort of adjust, and we'll sort of kind of go into that. But I think if we're thinking of it from that perspective, and we were to look at just the water plant alone, I think it's important to understand, like, how did we get there with regards to the water plant? And it takes an examination of going back to the summer, with the red water, murky water, water quality, all the things that are associated with that. The rainfall that we had that was so excessive, and this is sort of a seasonal thing. Even our engineers that had sort of looked at that with DEQ acknowledge that the problem that we have with regard to some of that, the red water and everything else, like right now things are better. However, cyclically, it's going to come back around again if we don't address this issue. And there are issues that happen in all municipalities as well. But ours, I'll explain why ours is a little bit worse. So if you look at our water treatment plant that was put in 15 years ago, DEQ did not require treatment at the lake, at the intake, for pre-settlement nor chemicals to knock down iron and manganese and other things before it got to the water treatment plant. As it currently sits now, we basically pull water directly from the lake. Directly, that raw water moves directly to the water treatment plant. So we are treating it straight from the lake to the water treatment plant. Because we don't have settling tanks in front of the water plant, and because we're not treating that water before it hits there, it's the best way to think of it is much dirtier, right? Has more treatment that needs to be done. When you look at that from that perspective, we having to treat that raw water without pre-treatment, what ends up happening is we spend much, much more money on chemicals. And then the membranes that are a part of the plant last probably half as long. So let's say they have a 5-year shelf life. Each one of those large membranes that goes within those tanks, if you guys have ever seen the video that I put up, cost about $890,000 per large membrane that's in one of those tanks. And so if we're getting half of our shelf life on those, we're going through a lot of money in chemicals. We're going through a lot of money in membranes every 18 months, 24 months, 2.5 years, when they should be lasting 5 years or longer. So part of the proposal in the from the utility rate study, working with engineers, DEQ, is part of the budget for that total project includes doing that, adding the pre-treatment at the lake, settling tanks prior to it gets to the water plant, which would drastically decrease the amount of dirty water that's getting to the water plant, making it more efficient, decreasing chemical use, increasing life in the membranes. Currently, we are, from my understanding, this came up in the summer too, because I had this question as well. But when you look at the engineering, we're backwashing every 15 minutes, and everyone you talk to talks about how that's way too much. We should be doing it like twice a day. The reason that we're backwashing that often is because of what I said just prior. We don't have any pre-treatment from the lake before it gets there. In addition to that, when you're backwashing so much, we're pushing into the pools of backwash to the lagoons that are right there outside the water treatment plant. Because of that, we've broken those areas down. And so they want us to redo those as well with concrete structure, redig those. And so that's part of the suggested engineering as well. And so all of these things that DEQ and the engineers are saying, and we've asked this question, is there anything that we don't have to do, that we shouldn't do, that is maybe a cost savings to us? And everything within the scope of project for the water treatment plant is necessary and required via the engineers and DEQ. And so from that perspective, the total tune of that is to about $12 million estimate, with a 10% contingency in for, fees that may go above. And again, it's an estimate, right? And so sort of the reason that we're meeting tomorrow is that there is a loan opportunity with the Oklahoma Water Resource Board that goes in through December. And there's a lot of monies involved in that. So it's loan money. So the city would be obtaining a loan through PVMA to be able to do this project with the water treatment plant to the tune of $12 million. And so the benefit of doing this now, as opposed to waiting a little bit longer, is that there are a lot of municipalities involved in this loan project that's going to be turned in December. And so that by participating with this, there are cost savings for us and all the fees and associated things that go in with loans. And so from that perspective, we're saving money by doing it now. We're going to have to do it in the very short coming months. These projects last, upwards of 3 years. But again, starting that, this has to start very soon based on DEQ guidelines and timelines and of expectation for deadline for completion of projects. So with all that being said, we're looking at $12 million. Now, you look at some of the issues with maintenance, upgrades, enhancements to the water plant. Basically, we push 550 million gallons of water through there a year. And so if you look at the cost of production of water per 1,000, it costs about $3.22 to produce it per 1,000 gallons. Costs, actually costs us $6.20 some odd cents to produce it. I misspoke. We are charging half that. We're charging like $3.22 for the water that we produce. So we actually are losing money on the water that we produce and is used by the citizens. And so you would like to have a 20 to 30% sort of aggregate to be able to put money back into the water treatment plant. And so by looking at that, what's being proposed is to address those associated shortfalls in water production, as well as to create a buffer to pay for the loan of the $12 billion for the water plant, and to have a little bit of an operating base to be able to do not just address the debt service, but to also address future needs for the water plant. And this will be done for municipal wastewater as well, but we're not talking about that right now. Is looking at like a $21.55 increase to utility rates. It would be pretty immediate. I think it would go into effect in October. That's about half of what we were talking about at the 41 cents. We were talking about doing both projects simultaneously. And so within this, it would only be addressing the water. But again, that would lessen the impact by about half for the base rate for those that use the least amount of water. And so I want to say it's around 800 to 1,000 gallons is sort of that initial lowest portion you can pay for the base rate. So looking at about a 21.55 increase in rate on per bill. And so kind of looking through my math. So from that perspective, that's something that will be discussed tomorrow. One thing worth noting, the revenue generated by the increase, if you look at what the total operating costs are for just the municipal authority in general, it's like 3.8 million. I want to say it's like 1.6 for the water plant. And so if you think about that, revenues generated by rate increases will be the offset of that. Now, one thing worth mentioning, we probably have about $1.3 million in total debt service related to Pauls Valley Municipal Authority, which basically makes our debt coverage ratio like what we owe to what we would be trying to request. I mean, there's certain laws that govern, you can't like, they want to make sure you can pay back the loan, right? We need to be at like 1.4, right? So some of that money is getting us over to where we can actually do that. And so that's worth noting. And I know folks are going to be at the meeting tomorrow. Highly encourage that. Reach out to your city council members if you have any questions in regards to that. But that's the basic crux of it, right? Nothing has been absolutely decided. I mean, we could go to the meeting and, discussion, all those things occur and we decide to do something different. I mean, until we get to the meeting, you don't know. Until we vote on it, you don't know. But that's sort of where we are. That's sort of how we got there. That's sort of where we're going. Kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. Now, the one thing I will say, in speaking, I've spoken to both legal and finance with folks that help us with that. When we do loans associated with things for city government or PVMA, and I ask questions like, "Hey, other municipalities, how does that look, right?" And so, they speak to. There's one of two types of communities. There are communities that are progressive and putting money away, doing projects as they come up. Cost of projects never decrease. Projects will be more expensive next year than they are this year, and so on and so on. So the inflationary effects of providing utilities for a city are never going to be static, right? I mean, you're not paying for the same hamburger from McDonald's from 20 years ago. It costs more. That will be no different for water, sanitation, or wastewater. And I don't say that as a revenue generator for the city to line its coffers. It's just basically to provide the service and to be able to do upgrades and enhancements as are needed by the city to provide water that the city deserves, these citizens deserve. And so the individuals that I've talked to in regards to that sort of say you can either fall in one of the two categories. You can not do that and kind of end up where we've sort of ended up now, right? You can pay fines, which seems cheaper at the time. But eventually those things, the bill comes due. Things need to be addressed and fixed. And then you have progressive cities that are doing that on the look ahead. And so I think my hope is that Pauls Valley will be a city that will be more progressive. We certainly want to protect our citizens. We certainly want to, have things be as affordable as we can make them, right? And I think that by looking at some of the things you looked at, we're certainly taking it into consideration. So that is not lost on anyone, both within the city and the council. And so from that point of view, that's worth mentioning as well. So got to pare away as we go. That's all I really have. So I guess you guys feel free to reach out, comment on this on my council page. Happy to have a dialogue with folks along the way. Again, the special meeting in regards to utility rates is tomorrow, 6 p.m. City Hall. You guys should come out, kind of see what's going on, stay informed. And if I have any other information, I'll certainly share that with you guys. Okay, we'll talk soon. Bye.